Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm here again with all the Rooks this evening. Hooray! Thanks for joining us last week for our Q&A. I know that there were some questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, and some people have asked about that, but don't fear, I have written all of them down. They're tucked away, and we'll come back to them at our next Q&A, which should be in a few weeks. So hi to everyone live on Twitch tonight, and hello to our YouTube viewers afterwards. So what are we talking about today? So today we're talking about, Pac-Man, apparently.
Andy's terrible sweater.
My awesome sweater, I think, is the correct way of referring to my sweater.
So today we're talking about video games and role-playing. I'll let someone else expand a little bit more than that, but if you, as usual, if you have any comments or questions, that's what makes the stream fun. Put them in the comments and I will bring them up on the screen and get my fellow Rooks to answer them. And nay, I will interrogate them.
Wow.
It's that kind of night.
Certainly is. In terms of video games and our own experiences, we're all in very different positions to each other. On one side, we've got someone like Mark, who has been so deeply entrenched in video game concept design and just generally video game age.
That's why he doesn't want to do it anymore.
I hear that.
That he doesn't want to do it anymore. As we move to people who are a little bit more in the middle, like, say, for example, Graham, who's done quite a lot of writing for a variety of different games, to someone like myself, who's done a bit here and there, a map here, a tiny bit of writing there, small smidgens, right down to Andy, who has, like me, played games to death until we're blue in the face. And from my perspective, I am, without doubt, an extraordinarily avid gamer. I will play literally anything, which will play into my parts of this conversation as we move on. So I shall pass over to whoever's on that side of me. I think it's Mark.
It's Mark.
It's me.
If he's got anything he would like to introduce and say before we go.
Only that... I've been working in video games since before I left Games Workshop. There was a sort of transition period where I started doing dabbling in that kind of stuff, and particularly when the PlayStation first launched in the mid '90s, and I realized that somebody with a background in concept art, illustration, like myself, there was the opportunity to actually for a load of work in that arena, because it had gone from sort of the pushing of pixels to games like Resident Evil and Tomb Raider and stuff like that, where they was actually creating proper art assets. And that's when I started working in them. And then for about the following 20 years, that was pretty much what I did for a living, culminating in moving to the States to work initially for Blizzard, and then Riot Games for a couple of years before deciding I wanted to go back to my first love, which was tabletop. So yeah, we've got lots to talk about my history with the old manipulation of the RGB light emitting things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great.
Well, in the early 90s, when people were still pushing pixels, and when most video games were made by an artist and a programmer, or sometimes just two programmers, Microprose in the UK pulled off something of a coup. They hired pretty much the entire Games Workshop design team. Mike Brunton went there, Jim Bambra, Steve Hand of Chainsaw Warrior and Fury of Dracula fame, and eventually me. And we worked there for a couple of years, got a couple of products out, and then Microprose UK, well, Microprose generally was taken over by a rival and shut down, and we all got laid off. But having had a taste of the better money in games,
oh yeah,
that's been a substantial part of my bread and butter ever since. And I've worked on, the biggest title I've worked on was the Total War strategy game series, because I'm a big history geek and I started consulting on the Viking expansion for Medieval 1. Mike Brunton, not by coincidence, was the lead writer there for many, many years. And then when mobile gaming came up, I did a lot of writing and narrative design, as it became called, for that. And when I'm not doing Rookery stuff and the odd bit of tabletop besides, that's pretty much how I make my living.
Thanks, Graham. Andy, any thoughts from you?
Well, no, I mean, as Andy mentions, I'm very much at the fan playing side of things rather than the production. And again, yeah, like Andy, used to be a very voracious video gamer. I'd say I'm far more selective now. I'm having a lot less free time than I did when I was a student and younger. But it's definitely been something that like even like from a very young age, like as well as playing like obviously in arcades, and we had one of those old kind of Binatone ones where you turn the dial to play like Pong and stuff like that. But we had like quite early on. We had a BBC, we had an early Apple, we had an Amstrad. Like my mum was a computing teacher in the 80s, which there weren't very many of those, which meant we quite often got computers quite early. Yeah, it's her fault. And also that is largely, my optician tells me, the reason I'm so short-sighted, because I used to sit about this close to the screen for hours and hours and hours and end playing. But nowadays, as I say, I don't really have as much time as I used to. And when I do, it's perhaps no surprise, given what we do with role-playing, that it's mostly role-playing games. Whether that is Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which is what I'm currently 18 hours deep into, or Witcher 3, or the Assassin's Creed games, things like that. Very good. And I also, the main difference between Andy and I is I do, or certainly have in the past, played a lot of first-person shooters as well, which has never really been his bag. So,
not my bag. I do avoid the first-person. I mean, I play them every once in a while, but they tend to bore me. If we go back to, say, for example, what we were discussing last week, where we briefly alighted on mechanics versus story, first-person shooters tend to be all about the mechanics, particularly when you go online.
Yeah, I've been more of a first-person shooter fan than you over the years. Occasionally, so I came probably later to gaming, and also television, because I didn't have a television growing up in the 80s, and it wasn't because rural Scotland didn't have TVs. It was just a life choice of my mum for us as young people. So I tended to play at other people's houses. I was still like quite an avid gamer, but only when I was able to go and access this through other people. And so for me, the big introduction to gaming really probably was when Andy... No, in fact, it was before that. I was going to say it's when you bought me a PlayStation, Andy, when we lived on the Royal Mile, but it was actually at the flat that the two Andys and I shared. And I remember very distinctly, we played, what did we play at New Year? Andy Lease went out and Andy Law and I stayed at home and played Mario Kart, yeah.
It's funny you mentioned going to other people's houses, because when I was in school, I had a good mate whose dad worked for Coinmaster, who at the time were they were a sort of supplier of arcade machines, and he would regularly at his house have the latest arcade machine. And of course, that as kids, the fact you could go there and it was free, you didn't have to put your 10p in. Like, we were just around there all the time, you know. And then another mate had a ZX Spectrum, so you go around and you play games on that. So yeah, it was. I think it was a Mega Drive was the first console, aside of the Amstrad or the Binatone or whatever it was. The first one I had for myself was definitely a Mega Drive. And there was no. I remember the games there. There was no saves. You had to play the entire game in one sitting.
Yeah, that was the one. I remember those days well.
Intolerable these days.
That's it.
But you didn't have saves, you had lives, didn't you? You had
absolutely.
But the sense of accomplishment when you actually achieved that, though, I remember much of my 6th year at school was misspent playing on the Super Nintendo, and like all 3 of the Super Mario games that were out at that point, and we did. It was a case of getting right to the end on a kind of a single playthrough, and it was I'm probably more proud of that than I am of my sort of qualifications I got in 6th year at school, to be honest.
So you've got a
Yeah,
fairly good idea of where we are all coming from. So if you have any particular questions you'd like us to answer, or if you have any comments about your own experiences that you think are relevant to what we're discussing, drop them in. Lindsay will flash them all over the place. Like, for example, I never had one of those. I had a lot of consoles, but never had one of those. So yeah, feel free to drop the comments in, and we'll flash them on the screen, and we'll discuss whatever pops up. Laser Squad in the 80s.
I don't know what my friend had because I was so clueless, but I remember going to a sleepover. We must have been 10 or 11, and we did like wake up at like 2 a.m. to sneak downstairs to continue playing a game called Wizard's Lair, which will probably, for those that know it, will tell you what it was on, but I can't recall. And we spent like 4 hours. Luckily, she had a really big house, so her parents didn't hear us.
Yep, me too. That was my first real console that I started off with, the old Atari. I had a Binatone before that, which we played, but it was Atari and then Atari computers and then into PCs and then into all the what we could be more modern consoles, our PlayStations and our Xboxes and all the rest. I have owned pretty much all of them.
Did you have an Amiga back in the day, Andy?
I didn't. I was an Atari ST.
I had an Amiga 1200, the big sexy one.
Yeah, that was where it was at. The thing that amazes me about that is how open the whole copying of games was. There was literally a shop in the Wellbank Centre in Dundee where it's just like an actual legitimate business where you could go in and buy illegally pirated games. Like it was so open.
It was only a different era.
Years later, you think back and go, how was that okay? Why were they allowed to do that? The answer was they presumably weren't, but just nobody was enforcing it. But, yeah.
So I have a question to start us off, and that is, which video game has inspired you most in your work in the roleplay industry?
My work. That's very different.
Yeah, it's your work.
My work.
What's your favorite game, or what's inspired you most in your personal life? Clearly Uncharted.
I think I have an answer, and it's a pretty old one, because if we're looking for what's inspired me, we're looking for something that's actually made me go, I want to do something like this, and to try and replicate it in some fashion. And this is not going to be a good game, but it is a game that inspired me significantly. It was called The Price of Magic, which was a text-based game from, I think, level 9, that you could get on ancient computers back when, everything was run by windmills. And it had a sanity mechanic, which is something that we've discussed recently, and we're considering discussing in the future, where as you progress through the game, your sanity was shaken as it would flash up on the screen as you move from room to room and encountered various gribblies that could only be defeated by having the correct artifacts or the right thing. And you were constantly typing in different commands in the hope that it would allow you to get to the next area. It was a thoroughly frustrating and terrible experience that required you to have a guide to get anywhere. But nevertheless, it was, for me, deeply inspiring because it sunk me into a world in a way that some previous games simply hadn't, because they were largely about the mechanics. They weren't about the story. And whilst there was a lot of roleplay games at that point that were available, I hadn't encountered them because I lived in a tiny little part of Scotland in the very north in a lighthouse. And this was the first game that when I played it, I went, I see. Things can be different. This was on the Atari 800 XL, so quite some time ago. And it very much inspired me. It made me want to, and importantly from the roleplay perspective, not be constricted by terrible programming decisions and choices. I wanted to play games where I could do what I wanted to do rather than what the game forced me to do. It was, I think, a primary driver towards me moving into role-playing games rather than video games as one of my primary points of expression. Because there you can say, here's a situation, and these are ways of tackling the situation, but they're not constrictive. Your players can go whichever way they want, unlike a computer game where you have to follow the trammels, the roads. Even when it's open world, it's still open world within a very restrictive set of guidelines. So if we're looking for one to inspire me, it's that one.
How about you, Mark?
I mean, historically speaking, I would probably say the Resident Evil series. Just in terms of sort of world building, in terms of as campy, as intentionally campy as the characters and the narrative always is, there's still a sort of a richness and a depth to them. And certainly at the time when they first came out, a sort of a fidelity that has, over the course of time, kind of bit me in the arse a little bit, because I now find them too frightening to play. I would love to play Resident Evil 7, but I've watched video footage of it, and I don't think I could cope. I am my own worst enemy in these cases, though, because when I play the Resident Evil games, it has to be at night in the dark, intentionally to immerse myself in that world, and I could only play for like 20 minutes at a time before I start getting palpitations. So I'm actually looking forward to the new Resident Evil Village, because from what I understand, it's a little less scary and more kind of fun horror shooter, which I could probably cope with. If it's less sort of jump scares, less sort of tension building, and more just running away from monsters chasing you through a town, I would probably be all right with that one. But the idea that you play these in VR as well is just no way, absolutely no way could I cope with that. So that's sort of that's my historical inspiration. But in terms of, I guess, professional, World of Warcraft, it has to be, because it's World of Warcraft that made me fall in love with Blizzard games, which ultimately is what brought me out to the States to work for Blizzard. Initially on Diablo, but ultimately I spent most of my time there. The 7.5 years I was at Blizzard working as the concept artist for World of Warcraft.
Andy Law couldn't play one of the Aliens games as a Marine.
That's so true.
He just couldn't do it.
A tiny small anecdote. I'm much like Mark. There's certain games that I just go, nope, hard nope out of. I watched Alien the very first time when I was a kid, around about 11 years old. And it had a significant impact on me. I adored it while simultaneously being absolutely freaked out by it. And when I moved into, I think it was EVP, Aliens versus Predator, and you wandered into a corridor and all the little face huggers came coming down. It was really low resolution. It was rubbish. I just hard noped out the game. I was like, no, I'm done. I'm done.
I take it you've avoided Alien Isolation then for the same reason.
I played a full half hour to an hour of that before I hard noped out. It was gorgeous, and it was exactly what I wanted, and I loved everything about it as I hard noped out.
I was the same. My friend Cara, who kind of writes for video games, she did a brilliant review of it for The Guardian that she published, and it's a lovely read, and she did a really good job of selling it. And every damn word that she wrote just made me go, that is not the game for me. It was all about how immersive it is, and you feel you're really there, and you're totally powerless, and you have to hide, otherwise, and you really feel it's going to eat you, and you're like, yeah, no, I don't actually want to feel that. No thanks. It's not fun. All right.
No. What about you, Graham?
Well, a couple, I guess, for different reasons. One would be Monkey Island, just because it's a different way of looking at a story. I mean, you know, respecting everything Andy said about trammels and limitations, and having tried to design computer RPGs, it is very, very limiting, because, you know, if you haven't got a GM and a computer doesn't know what to do, it simply falls over. And so you've got to kind of, half the art is hiding the limits you place.
Yeah.
But Monkey Island, in terms of narrative and characters, I did love the humor. And by that time, I'd been role playing long enough that I could kind of see I could play the game and see the wheels going round underneath. And that started me thinking about, you know, the mechanics of storytelling and that sort of thing, and how to strip them down to their bare essentials. And the other one was also a swashbuckler. It was Sid Meier's Pirates. And the thing I liked about that was the way it was essentially 3 or 4 different games bundled together in service of a common story. And that got me thinking in different ways about sub games and how the, you know, horses for courses, the right tool for the job sort of thing. I don't know how much any of that influenced my work in the role play industry, but it got me to look at what I was doing in the role play industry with slightly different eyes.
And I mean, you've always spoken about how important it is to you to have both humor and peril in your stories, and that, like Monkey Island, that's right there. Like, there is a proper, you know, perilous story, but there is a lot of humor there as well. Like that fusion is right there.
Right.
I'd entirely forgotten about Monkey Island until you said it. Yeah. A whole wave of childhood nostalgia came back to me there. Yeah.
If it weren't for Monkey Island, I wonder if we'd even have Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
As you're all speaking, all I'm doing is, because I'm looking at the questions, things like what would be your top 3 games, and as you're speaking, I'm like, oh, like this one, oh no, that one, oh no, this one, like they're just all popping into my head.
There's too many.
So which ones inspired you the most, Andy?
I mean, in terms of storytelling, probably very specifically Mass Effect 2. But I don't know, I should maybe hold off on that if we're going to talk a bit more about Mass Effect later. Because there's another very close second, and it's sort of the opposite. Like, so Vagrant's comment about flawed games inspiring you a lot, and I absolutely agree with that. But I also think perfect games can also inspire you. And for me, Insomniac's Spider-Man game is the perfect video game experience for me. I appreciate that may differ for other people, but that point that Andy was making about mechanics versus story, and what you almost want in an ideal world is the mechanics to disappear into the story. And like there's in terms of motivation, when it's obviously, as I imagine everybody watching knows, I'm a teacher in my other life as well. And when sort of devising activities and rewards and things, there's this constant balance as a teacher between intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. So to what extent do you give a kid a sticker or a prize, and to what extent do you try and make the task and achieving the task its own rewards? And what I find, like pretty much every video game, I play a lot of these open world games, like Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed and all of those, and I enjoy them. And they all have these kind of time sink activities in them, which are designed to make you explore the open world map. So, go collect 100 of these things that are hidden kind of around the map. And, because there's trophies dependent on that, you always sort of try and kind of get them all. And you always get the point of there's 2 or 3 left. And then it's like you break down and you look on the internet and try and find a map to tell you where to find the ones that you haven't got and all that kind of stuff. And what was interesting with Spider-Man was it was the first game that had, setting aside like novelty games that the trophies were a joke, but it's the first game that I ever got a platinum on the PlayStation, like without trying. I just loved just swinging around that city as Spider-Man. Felt so much fun just doing it. Like sometimes I would go on and I had a story mission. I wouldn't play the story mission. I just swing around for ages, and occasionally stop a street crime here and a street crime there. There was such joy in the experience of playing the game, of inhabiting that world. The mechanics entirely disappeared, and I just was Spider-Man swinging around the city. And I think in terms of like game design, if you can do that so that the actual process of people playing, it's not a case of, right, we killed the monster, so can we get some XP because I want to spend my XP or I want to get my magic stuff and I want to level up. But the process of playing the game is what's rewarding. The XP, great, lovely, I'll develop my character. But actually playing the game is the reward, not the thing I get for playing the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a very specific question here. I presume this is for you, Mark. Maybe not, actually. Maybe it's for all of you. Did you work on the abandoned Warhammer MMO?
Nope. I interviewed for it. I went to what was the name of the studio that's making it in Nottingham? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
No.
That's annoying. I remember the one that came after. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Move on.
No.
It'll come to me. I went up and spoke to them.
Mythic, there you are.
It wasn't Mythic. It wasn't Mythic.
It was the one before.
All right.
I think there was a couple at the time. There was a couple of ex studio staff working there. Maybe Jake Thornton was working on it at the time. So I went up and spoke to them, and I met with Robin Dews was kind of who had been White Dwarf editor when I was at the studio. He was involved. And I went up there, met with Rick Priestley, and talked about it. But I think I was at Sony at the time, and I was just kind of like looking around for other opportunities. I think the game I was working on, this is more than 20 years ago now. The game I was working on at Sony was wrapping up, and I was just thinking what I wanted to do next. And because the team I was on at Sony, I think we had just secured the rights to make the game of 24, the TV series, and I was an art lead at the time, but my main job was doing concept art, and I thought it's not really much. I mean, Jack Bauer, we all know what he looks like, It's kind of like I felt like it wouldn't be particularly satisfying job for me, so I just started sort of looking about and seeing what else was going on. But there was something about the studio that this sort of third-party studio that was making the MMO that I got a vibe for, that I thought, I'm not sure. And I wasn't sure at that point whether I wanted to go back to Nottingham. I did subsequently when I went back for my second tour of duty at GW itself, but it didn't feel like the planets were aligned for me at that time. So the answer to the question is no, I didn't. Well, no, the first video game, the first video game I worked on, I remember this last night, the first game I worked on was actually a Games Workshop game, and it was Final Liberation, which was an epic 40k turn-based strategy game. And I got involved with that. I got hired by Brightlight Studios to do storyboards and some concept art for the FMV live-action cutscenes. And Brightlight Studios, anybody who was gaming from back in the day might remember them. They was an effects studio that built these fantastic life-size Space Marines and Gene Stealers and stuff for video tests that Workshop were doing at the time to explore the possibility of maybe getting into film and TV series. So they hired me to do that stuff. And my girlfriend at the time was an actress, and she landed the role of the planetary governor's wife in the FMV. So we went down to Coventry, where Brightlight were based, and they put me in an Imperial Guards uniform. So I would, but I think I got cut. I think my performance ended up on the cutting room floor. I don't think I'm in the final game, but that was the first video game I worked on.
So there's a question from Zoltana. What type of game do you prefer? Roguelike, strategy, first-person shooter, sport, RPG? Anyone want to go first? Anyone got an idea straight into their mind?
Action RPGs are generally where I'm at my happiest. So where Assassin's Creed has generally moved to, where somewhere like something like Mass Effect or say Dragon Age currently is, I enjoy RPGs, but I tend to find that sometimes they lose my attention, where something like, say, The Witcher tends to carry me through far more likely. So that's where my sweet spot is. Something that I can play for the mechanics, but also enjoy a really deep and meaningful story. And where the stories are very well put together, I'm at my happiest. So less the Assassin's Creed, where the stories tend to be less good and less well acted, although I enjoy the games, and more, say, for example, The Witcher, which was very well put together. Some extraordinary scenes in that one. And maybe more for some of the isometric RPGs that have been coming out recently, the Baldur's Gate clones. There's a variety of them that have popped out from a bunch of studios, and I've played most of them, and I've run through most of them and enjoyed most of them. But for me, it is ultimately the story. But to finish on one point, I do sometimes play games purely for the story that are bad at mechanics. You're looking at, say, your Final Fantasies, which are often terrible. And I think as a way of singly expressing that, Final Fantasy for me is super influential because they showed me the benefits of mini games, small encapsulated experiences within the greater experience. And the reason for me that they were so important for Final Fantasy is because the core game was terrible, but the mini games were often quite good. So when your mini games, the mechanics of those are more interesting and compelling than the core game itself, there's obviously an issue. But it showed me the benefits of it. Final Fantasy VII was the one that dragged me into that whole mindset and changed how I worked on roleplay games as well, where I no longer thought of just the core mechanics that are presented in the core book, plus, say, for example, the story of a particular campaign. I was far more interested in building experiences. And that, to a degree, hit the design of Fantasy Roleplay 4, but it very much is setting the design for what we're doing with things in the Rookery, where we're looking at no longer worrying about the core system that's behind it. In many respects, everything that we create, to a degree, is a mini game. Even though we're building a strong narrative that runs through it, anything that we add mechanically is a mini game that sits on top of whatever game that you have, and we are doing that. So, to cut a long story short, Final Fantasy VII, rubbish but great.
Yeah, I love Final Fantasy X. I think I mentioned that on a previous stream, that I have played that so many times, over and over and over. I don't know if I've ever finished it, because at some point I always get completely distracted by my Blitzball team, and then just end up playing Blitzball for weeks, like maybe even months sometimes.
Sad but true.
Yeah. I also like a racing game, but like literally only Wipeout.
Mm.
So only cars that like glide. If it doesn't glide, I'm not into it. Mark, what do you like?
Oh, remind me what the question was again.
What
type
type
of video
of game?
game
Like
do you
what category?
Oh,
Oh, sorry, I've taken it away, haven't you?
third person action adventure, probably primarily. I think my favorite game of the last few years was The Last of Us. Again, a beautifully scripted narrative. The open world stuff, which I used to really like, I just don't have. I'm not prepared to devote the time to it. I wanna not on rails, because you always want to feel like you've got some sort of control and some agency over the experience. And for me, The Last of Us really hit that perfectly, hit that real sweet spot. I also like sort of puzzle solvers as well. Ico is one of my all-time favorite games. Again, for the beautiful world and the little sort of environmental challenges that you had in that. Love that stuff. FPSs used to be a big Counter-Strike, Half-Life fan, but I found as I've got older, my reactions have slowed down. I'm not as good as those anymore. A game, a third-person action-adventure game that takes maybe 15 hours to complete. That's my very specific. I don't want a 100-hour game. If it's got 100 hours on the packaging now, I'm like, yeah, no, I haven't got time for that. So beautifully curated. Yeah.
I went to the V&A in Dundee when they had their video games exhibition, and they had a whole load of concept art and narrative design for The Last of Us. So it was a really good exhibition, actually. It wasn't the only game they had, but I lingered on that and took loads of photos for Andy because I don't think he was very well, and I knew he loved the game. So I was like, you have to see. It didn't really, I guess, looking at it on my phone wasn't as good as looking at it in real life, though.
Odd that. Yeah.
Yeah, never mind. The thought was there.
Good call. Last of Us is brilliant.
Yes, I haven't played the second one yet. I'm kind of I'm sort of saving myself a little bit for that. When I can set aside, the requisite amount of time and kind of dive in, I definitely want to play that.
It is my favorite dad simulator. It's just brilliant.
Yes.
It's just great. Love it. And I think what they did with the second one was both brave and had to be done in a variety of ways. I have many
spoilers.
No point. I'm not going to spoil it. That's all I'm saying. Had to be done. That's it. So yeah, I'm done.
How about you, Graham?
Well, I, like Mark, would love to be into some of the real deep open world RPGs and stuff, but there just isn't enough time. And I in my work, I have to look at a lot of games, especially demos and games that don't quite work, and figure out why and all of that. So it's sort of, when I'm at the end of that, I often don't feel like starting a game for fun. What I do like to do is to look at games of various different genres, anything from match 3 games to shooters, and just dip a toe in and see how they've articulated the story, how they've integrated it with the action, how the two serve each other. That's something that I find fascinating. The last game that really caught my attention was Life is Strange. Just because its narrative was just it was such a nice narrative and so well articulated, both storytelling wise and mechanically.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So something we're not talking about today, but the what makes a game good to watch someone else play it is often very different. What makes a game good to play it yourself. So in our house, because most of us are gamers, we spend a lot of time also watching each other. Andy and my older daughter have like narrating their gameplay down to a fine art. They maybe should think about getting into streaming. But really, some games are just, I would never sit down and watch him play, and some games like I'm totally into, like quite invested in, even though I maybe wouldn't play them myself. And just to get you ready for a future question, one is going to be like, what are your top 3 games? So think about that while we go to Andy for his what type of game he prefers.
I mean, for the single player experience, very, very similar to what Andy was saying. The kind of action RPG, you may be leaning a little bit more towards the action side of it. I think the Uncharted series, for instance, like had a lot of fun with them because they were just again fun. Like the tone of the stories were, although dramatic stuff was happening, it was quite lighthearted. I mean, Nathan Drake is like a war criminal, like he's a mass murderer. How many thousands of people he kills in those games, and yet he's always ready with a quip. Somehow keeps it lighthearted. But in terms of like first person shooters, like although I do play them quite a lot, although I haven't so much recently, just because of not having as much time. But what's interesting to them is I quite often don't finish the single player campaign. What I'm interested in is the multiplayer, but not much like Mark. I've encountered that thing of my reflexes not being what they once were. And you just have to accept if you're going to play online that, some 13-year-old on the internet is going to absolutely destroy you and just be at peace with that. And I am. But it's quite good. I've got a group of friends that I play first person shooter with that we've kind of been playing online. I've never met any of them in real life. They're all kind of dotted around the UK, and we're friends on Facebook and stuff. But that's the main reason that we play, actually, when we all happen to get into a game at the same time and we all decide we want to play it together. And there's a social element to that. We tend to we tend to prefer the Battlefield series to Call of Duty, for instance, because it tends to have more game modes where there's a tactical element. And what we've worked out is that a bunch of us in our 40s, and some of us maybe a little older than that even, the only way we're going to win in an internet game like that is if we play smart. We're never just going to win on reaction time. But if we can actually think about it and play tactically, and our kill-death ratio will be terrible, but we've won the game because we've actually done the tactical objective, and that's the way you play. So, yeah.
What game has caused the most cursing?
For me, Shadow of the Colossus. No question. Because I loved Ico again. Is one of my sitting in my top 5. So when Shadow of the Colossus came out, I was so excited to get a game from that same team, and I just kept falling off these big bastards. I just couldn't hang on to them, and I literally throw the controller across the room and scream at the telly. Partly frustration at my own, lack of dexterity, and also how horribly disappointed I was that this was not what I was hoping my gaming experience would be. So that it's still to this day I get PTSD from that video game. Sorry, guys.
I think it's XCOM for me. I absolutely love XCOM. Like I've played XCOM through so many times. Like I'm not even joking. Like probably up into triple figures the amount of complete playthroughs of XCOM that I've played through, and like played through like a lot on my own. But also there's me and a couple of my good friends from uni. And this is the rock and roll lifestyle that we have. But we used to kind of get together at my mate Dav's on a Friday, and we'd order some pizza, drink some beer, and we would just play together, just like collectively making the decisions of what we were going to do. And like we'd have it running for years. We'd be playing this. We'd really get to know the characters. And then because of the nature of XCOM, you got a 94% chance you failed, and then suddenly, your squad gets wiped out, and you've known these people for ages, and you built them up. And we were customizing them all, and we was, and definitely we turned the air very, very blue. The alcohol probably exacerbated that. But,
I think my only answer to this one would be all of them. Stroke. Lindsay can probably answer better than me. In that, whenever I'm a quite vocal player sometimes. I'm like, but I don't throw the controller because
I would say anything that doesn't have an autosave.
No, totally right. In fact, just playing Mass Effect 1, it's got terrible autosaving. It's a bit older school than what comes later. Mass Effect 2 is not perfect, but it's much better. And several times I had gone through a good hour or so worth of stuff, died in a stupid way, and went, the autosave will catch me. No, there is none. You're right back to an hour or so ago, and I have to throw the controller away. But I tend to find that most games at some point or another will annoy me because I often chase trophies when I'm playing them just to try and get most out of the various experiences that are on offer. And that generally means going through some of the harder difficulties, which generally means you're going to get frustrated at difficulty spikes, and the games are not very well designed in terms of their difficulty ramping up at a smooth rate rather than just going, it's like this, then bang!
Oh, the difficulty spike is a killer. It's such a killer.
Yeah, and I suppose all the Souls games have got a good bit of that, our Dark Souls or our Demon Souls.
I was going to say.
Wary in terms of, oh my God, I've died. I've got to go through this whole level again from the beginning.
But friends of mine have recommended the Bloodborne and stuff like that to me, but I know how punishing they are.
They are.
And I know how much that would drive me mad. So what I found myself doing with a lot of those is watching playthroughs. I never thought I would sit there and watch a stranger, play through an entire game on YouTube. But I found myself doing that to absorb the world,
Particularly with something like Bloodborne, where it's just dripping with such a cool look all the way through. And you're absolutely right. It is punishing, and it can be exceedingly frustrating if you don't have the time to put into mastering all the core mechanics so that you can get past. And then just when you're at the point where you're going, I'm doing well, everything changes a little. And it's not unfair. It's just punishing.
I'm a bit of a button masher historically. So it kind of, I need to be able to get through a game without learning a sophisticated combination of button pushes. It has to be, the mechanics have to be a little bit forgiving for me. Otherwise, I just can't do it. Hence my Shadow of the Colossus issues.
What about you, Graham? I can't imagine you swearing. And of course, I don't swear.
That's it. I shall treasure that, Lindsay. Thank you. Well, I would have to say probably any multiplayer shooter, because my approach specifically to shooters are going back to Doom. I can't stop thinking of them as primarily a puzzle. You figure the layout, you find out where the enemies are, you counter them, and of course, all bets are off in a multiplayer, like a LAN game or an online game. And so I get caught in the same stupid traps again and again and again. I get spawn killed repeatedly because I'm not quick enough moving off, because I'm looking around saying, okay, where am I? Where's the nearest supplies? And so that.
That's what I love about those games. I'm the guy who's laying the trap. That's what I have a very fond memory of playing the old Wolfenstein back in the day online. And there was a tram multiplayer map. It was at the time, it was one of the biggest multiplayer maps you could play on it. And I remember a friend of mine, Mark, and we'd worked out that if you just dropped off the tram as soon as you spawned, you could kind of hide, and you were miles away. But if you were a sniper, you had a really good line of sight, but nobody ever thought you'd be there because they thought you'd be up at the top of the tower. And it was such fun. I mean, we were basically just trolling people, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can't think what games make me swear most. Andy will have to answer that for me too. You can think about that. What did you think of the Vermintide games?
I have opinions in this. I think they're great. I think they're a lot of fun. I think they did a very good job at exactly what they were trying to do. They're not just fun, they're very neatly put together. I will also admit to knowing quite a few of the people who are involved with making it. So it makes it a little bit of a, can I really have an unbiased opinion about this?
No, because they are very decent people.
Yeah.
Because they're lovely.
Yeah. And I owe them, personally, a huge debt. They were so helpful in the Ubersreich stuff. They sent us a kind of a sort of video demo thing where you could kind of fly around Ubersreich and sort of see, so that we could make sure that everything we made fit within the geography that was already there.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah.
They were the coolest people ever, to the point that when we were finished all the primary writing and we moved over towards the production and the art and how it was going to look, I secretly got in contact with one of them and got them to send over some of their studio staff's pictures. And we put the CEO, the head of art design, a couple of the writers into one of the art pieces that were in the final one. They were a bunch of rat catchers.
Nice.
And their studio logo was worked into one of the signs that I drew. for it as well. So we popped them directly into the book as a way of saying thanks so much for being the coolest folks ever, and helping us put together our version of Ubersreich. And in turn, our version of Ubersreich then went back to them, and they got to look at that and say, well, we like these parts, and they started adding parts from what we did back into their game too. I had some beautiful conversations with them. They are the coolest people ever. So I have a completely non-biased view, but I will say they're great games and you should all buy them.
I have to agree. I had a lovely stroll through Bogenhafen, not quite a tranquil stroll, with Morten Stormdahl, their narrative director, for a stream a little while ago. And it was just amazing to see this thing that had just existed in my mind, that I'd drawn a map of 30 odd years ago, built and buildings and so on. And the other thing I really admire about Vermintide is, while it's essentially a game about killing hordes and hordes and hordes and hordes of things, they really do pay attention to the story and the setting. I've had a few conversations with them, and they are enormous Warhammer fans, and they're really dedicated to getting it right.
Yeah, I had a host of conversations with them concerning lore points, right down to small details. Like at one point, I was sending them a variety of different wine types that you might get in the Warhammer world, because they were looking to put some wine bottles in the background of one of their scenes. So I sent them over a whole variety of different ones with backgrounds for how they could all work, and they worked them in and then sent me over all the bottles and saying, look at what we made. They're just the loveliest people.
They really are.
Yeah, they're just the loveliest people that really do care about the details. So as I say, if you've got any love of Warhammer and computer games, you should be playing that one, because they have a lot of love for Warhammer and computer games.
And it shows. Yeah,
absolutely.
So here's the question. What would be your top 3 or 5 games? You don't need to say them all at once. If you've got one, we can go around everyone and then come back.
I don't know. I mean, that's a toughie, isn't it? Because I've not prepped, so I've not really had a lot of thought. And no matter what I answer, I will change it next time.
Yeah.
And a lot of the games that I particularly love are not necessarily the best games.
I mean, maybe better to say what are 3 of your top games? Like,
that might be better. Yeah. 3 games that you really love. Regardless, I think that's fair. Okay, well, I'll drop one of mine. It's the obvious one because it's been talked about quite a lot of late, and that's Mass Effect. I adore Mass Effect for all of its many, many, many flaws. There is an enormous number of them in all 3 games. They are, to their core, broken in one fashion or another for one reason or another, but I adore them. I adore the first one for the story that it was quite effectively telling. For all the rest of it was really not very well put together. I adore the second one for its real grip of character and its desire to build a very strong team, and the effect of what those teams will have upon each other. And I enjoyed the third one for actually being a conclusion. Did I like the last 10 minutes? I did not. Did I like the rest of the game? Yes, I did. And Mass Effect 3 receives an enormous amount of criticism from a variety of different fronts. But they seem to miss the core parts, which is the actual game itself. All the good bits were amazing. The end was just unfortunate. It was crap icing on the pudding.
I do like Mass Effect, but for a peculiar reason, and that is that I played the first Mass Effect long after it had come out, and only after, Andy Law, you had made a 40k mini campaign for me that was based on the plot of Mass Effect, but transported and appropriately inquisitorified. And so when I was playing the game, it was just so much fun. I was like, oh, that's that character, and that's that character. And check me, I'm the hero.
Good times.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna sorry. I'm gonna pick one of mine. Despite what I said about not really being a first-person shooter guy, I'm gonna say Thief was one of my favorite games. Because the sort of agency you had over the character, and whether you chose to put torches out with your water arrows and sneak past characters, guards and stuff, or whether you wanted to leap out and stab them viciously. I love that. Am I in the shadows? Can they see me? All that sort of stuff was just really immersive. Really drew me in. Loved that game.
I love Thief. I had forgotten about it, but that was one of the first games I felt really got me. And it was because of that. It was because it offered so many different ways to play and actually offered a way to succeed and was one of the better ways to succeed that was much more like my play style. So yeah, I loved that game too.
Okay,
Graham, what about you?
I'm going with another one.
You thought of another one?
I've got one. Yeah, Deus Ex. And I'm choosing this one not because Deus Ex is the best example of the genre, or indeed the game I like most. I don't, but because without it, we wouldn't have the other ones. And I'm going back to Deus Ex is a painful experience. It's terrible, but as a role-playing game, it was brilliant, and for exactly the same reasons that we were mentioning there regarding Thief. Multiple routes through the story. Regardless of your build, you could do it until some stupid bad guys that difficulty spiked like mad.
Or more than that. There's one specific bit in it, and I'll keep it vague to avoid spoilers in case anybody hasn't played this 20-year-old game. But there's one bit, and it's my own fault, really. I should have just chilled out. But there's one bit where you're fighting somebody, and I lost. And every time I lost, I quick loaded back to my previous save before, and tried again, and tried again, and tried again, and tried again. And I'm not joking, like literally like 20, 30 times in a row. And eventually, in frustration, I just sat back and let the cutscene unfold to discover it was scripted, so there was no way to beat this bad guy. You had to lose and be captured.
Oh no, that's bad.
I had the same experience in Wing Commander. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2, where you lose one of your squadron. And I spent the best part of a week trying to prevent that from happening.
I just had exactly the same thing in Mass Effect 2. It was a situation that I'd forgotten about, and I went, "Oh crap, I died." Reloaded, did it again, and I just left it running. I was like, "Oh crap, I was meant to die." In fact, if we're ever talking about Mass Effect, that particular piece of the game is one of the biggest mistakes the entire series makes. It's the one that heralds what happens in Mass Effect 3 because they take away agency. And it's when they begin to take away agency from you, and they don't give you a choice, and you're left going, "But I wouldn't have done that."
Yeah.
And that is something that trammels right through to the end of the game, where you're just left going, "But I wouldn't have done that."
It's one of the worst things you can do in narrative design.
Particularly if your core selling point is the decisions you make a difference. And then when they say the decisions you make a difference, and by the way, your character is now going to do this, and you have no choice, that's when it begins to fall apart. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And what about you, Graham? What's your
the first game I played to absolute destruction was Medieval 1 Total War. And there are reasons for this. First, I'm a big history geek, studied archaeology at college. And at Games Workshop, I was involved in testing a game called Blood Royal. And there are lots of similar games. That's the European medieval grand strategy genre. And there were 3 of us playing this. We played through the night until dawn. And we'd got to the end of turn 3. And I remember thinking at the time, if only we had a computer to take care of all this. And then Medieval Total War came out. And I just played it to absolute destruction. And after I played it to destruction, I started using different strategies. Like I played an entire campaign as Venice without fighting. Because Venice was so rich, I just bribed everybody and I hired mercenaries. So that was still a favorite for me, although I'm not sure. I still got it. I'm not sure if I can get it to run on anything these days.
Great game. In fact, I love the Total War games in general. Great games. I started in Rome.
Right.
And it completely gripped me. I played that game to distraction. I really liked it. And no, that's not true. I started as Shogun. No, I started in Rome. I can't remember. I started in one of them. I'm older now and I forget.
Whatever it was you played, you're playing it on something powered by Steam anyway.
Yeah. And that's Steam with a small s. Yeah. And, I was so obsessed with Medieval 1 that all the upgrades they made in Rome, like the animations on the travel and they moved the battle sort of the grand strategy away from the sort of board gamey metaphor that they'd used before. I didn't like those because they weren't like Medieval 1. I got very grognardy about that.
I'm surprised that Andy Law, and actually surprised it hasn't come up. No one's mentioned Portal. You were like so into that.
Yeah, Portal's great. In fact, it's brilliant. Portal 1 I would put right up there as one of the best games that I played, just because it's a very neat experience. It's not too long. The puzzles are clever. And just when it reaches the point when you think it's outstaying its welcome, it finishes. It's funny, it's humorous, it's got a fun song, and it's got just enough mystery that you're left going, ooh, what's going on? It's just brilliant. It's a beautiful package. One of those rare games. Agreed.
And Righty Stream stuff is mentioned. This was earlier, and there are very few games that suck up time. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and probably 3 in Oblivion. I have to say, Baldur's Gate 1 for me is one of my favorite games of all time. Like, I have such fond memories of playing it, and I just love that game so much. And we still say quotes from it in the house to this day.
To this day. Lord Murder has perished.
Yeah, we sing that. And if we're waiting for someone to leave, we obviously say, you must gather your party before venturing forth. Like, it's just sunk into our consciousness, which I think is a sign of a good game.
Yeah. Oh, I have a question on this one for those of you who've played it. Has anybody else spent more than 2 hours just rolling up characters, trying to get the perfect character? Yes.
Almost any game... almost any game that gives you the option to dive deep into character creation. I have on occasion spent more time creating a character than actually playing the game.
Yeah,
that's happened.
Yeah,
let me just go for the eyes as well. Go for the optics because I'm playing Mass Effect. I particularly love all the little call-outs in Mass Effect back to Baldur's Gate. Like, for example, there's a space hamster. It goes squeak, just like Minsk's old space hamster's giant space hamster that he had with him. And, of course, one of the characters calls out, go for the eyes, but it's go for the optics instead. And all those little call-outs are one of the reasons that I quite like BioWare games for, even when they fail, which some of them do, there's enough of a buy-in in terms of all of the collected mythos around everything they've created, right, from their Jade Empire and the Star Wars games and all the rest, that when they pop up and you see them come out, you just sit there smiling going, yeah, I'm one of your fans. You can't help but be dragged in by these things. And it's one of the things that I enjoy when I'm doing the creating for our side, when we drop in all those little notes, the things that we've done in the past. And the people who spot it, and everybody else doesn't really care because it's just another thing that's in the game. But for the people who spot it, they immediately go, oh yeah, that's great. I understand what these things are. And it's those Easter eggs that keep us going and keep everybody out there going as well.
So we've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up with a question. And that is, if there's one word that you would like to bring from your experience of video game, whether that be playing, working in the field, one word that you'd like to bring to the experience of the Rookery for people, what would that be?
Holy crap. That's not one word.
That's 2 words. Holy crap, that's 2 words.
Damn it, I was close.
I think mini games, for one.
Yeah,
would be like high on the list for me.
One word is really hard to the point of.
Well, I'm going to say agency because I've said it a couple of times already in this stream. So giving players a sense that they control their destiny. They're not as much as I said with games. As much as I kind of like a curated narrative, it's kind of balancing that with the feeling that I can actually tackle any challenge in a variety of ways, and it's my decision how I would like to play the game. That for me, that translates so nicely into tabletop stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would say modularity, if that's even a word.
It is now.
Yeah, because in designing a video game and working on a video game, it's a bunch of components, and seeing that and seeing how things fit together to make something that's greater than the sum of their parts is really the trick to video game design, I've discovered. And it also plays into our philosophy of, well, here's a bunch of stuff, you can use it as written, you can put it together in different configurations, you can pick one, throw away the rest, whatever. So yes, modularity is my word of the day.
Excellent.
For me, I'd say joy, like that joy of playing Spider-Man, where the whole process, the actual playing of it is rewarding. So yeah, That's why I do joy.
Excellent. And we've got one final question, which we don't have time to answer, but I thought it was an intriguing one. So I'm just going to put it out there.
You'll have to wait and see.
You'll have to wait and see.
I didn't even get to answer the last question.
Oh,
which is
sorry.
probably-
You've got 1 minute.
It's probably a good thing because my answer has already been said by everybody else. If I was to just look at one aspect of it, one of the things that I particularly enjoy with role-playing games is exactly what Mark mentioned when he was bringing up his part, is the agency that you have that you don't get in video games. Video games gives you the feeling of agency, and it's such a more immediate medium than, say, books or movies or something else, because it can sink you into a narrative in a way that they can't, but can in other ways, where role-playing can sink you in a completely different way. And trying to present a strong narrative while still preserving that is, I think, core to everything that we're trying to put together on the campaign side. That feeling of agency, while simultaneously saying we have an awesome epic tale that we'd like you to engage with, but we'd like you to engage with it in your own way. So I suppose that can all sum up with everything that they've said, and just engagement in general, a way of trying to ensure that we present material that is as cool as we want, that presents an awesome narrative as we want, but simultaneously is yours. And it goes in your own direction, and you take from it from what you want. And that's our challenge, and I'm particularly enjoying it.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, totally.
So that's 8 o'clock, and I have to go and watch Eurovision. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to say goodbye to you all. Thank you very much for joining me, as always, my fellow Rooks. And thanks for all your questions. I think we covered them all tonight. As I said, there was a few from last week, but we'll cover them in a few weeks' time. I hope you all have a lovely rest of Saturday, whatever time it is where you are.
And one thing to ask before we leave is if anybody has a suggestion for topics for future streams, do share them with us on our Discord server or on Twitter or on Facebook. If there's things you'd like to hear our thoughts on, then do share.
Great.
Yeah, because otherwise you'll just hear us going on and on and on about stuff we want to talk about. that gets old.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
All right.
Bye now.
See you later. Bye.